Our story today is told by a cashier. She says this: a lady gave me her food order. I repeated back the order and told her that comes to $6.66. She said, oh no, I don't like that number, 666. You better throw in a corn dog. Surely this woman is an inspiration. She's out here fighting off the powers of Satan with a corn dog as her weapon of choice. Today is the great feast day of St. Thomas of Becket. I encourage you to read T.S. Eliot's poem novel about the life of Thomas of Becket called Murder in the Cathedral. I'd also recommend watching that great film of 1964 with Peter O'Toole playing Henry II and Richard Burton playing Thomas of Becket. Brilliant movie. It won some Academy Awards, and it tells the story of this great saint that we honor today, St. Thomas of Becket, who was about 400 years before St. Thomas More, who would be named after him. And as you know, Thomas More had the conflict with Henry VIII. Thomas of Becket had the conflict with Henry II. Thomas of Becket was born in London in the year 1117 into a very wealthy family. He was brilliant, well-educated in Paris and Italy, became a lawyer, and he joined the household of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was ordained a deacon and appointed Archdeacon of Canterbury, very prestigious title. He was considered obviously a brilliant man. He was also tall, dark, and handsome, and lived a very lavish life of wealth and magnificence, rivaling that of the king. But he was a moral man. He was devout. He was a devout Catholic, but he lived in opulence, and he became good friends with King Henry II. And Henry II appointed him the Chancellor of England, just as Henry VIII would appoint Thomas More, the Chancellor of England. And it seemed that it's a great relationship. They became great friends. But then the Archbishop of Canterbury died, and Henry had to pick the next archbishop. And he knew that Thomas was very, very loyal to him, that he was a good friend, and that by appointing his friend Thomas, he could control the church. And he could then tax the church, and he could really govern the church and also seize some of the lands and the monasteries. And this was his plot, this was his plan. When he told Thomas he was going to choose him to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas said, "Do not do that. I tell you, if you do that, you will regret it." But he chose him, and Thomas, after his election as the Archbishop of Canterbury, was completely transformed. He was a changed man. He sold his palaces and went to live in a monastery and governed his diocese by living a life of simplicity and austerity in the monastery. He gave all his opulence to the poor, and he decided to obviously serve God faithfully as he served his king. So again, very much like Thomas More, being the king's good servant, but God's first. And then when Henry II began to interfere with ecclesiastical matters and take away the rights of the church and religious freedom, Thomas had to speak up. And because of that, he was exiled for 7 years. He eventually came back from France, even though there was still conflict with the king. And some of the king's soldiers overheard the king saying, "Who will rid me of this troublesome priest, this troublesome cleric?" The soldiers looked upon it as a way to gain favor with the king. So they went to the cathedral on December 29th, this very day, and he in the year 1170, and Thomas of Becket, as the Archbishop of Canterbury, was leading Vespers in the cathedral over by the Blessed Mother's side of the altar. If you go to the church today, you can still see the place where the martyrdom of Thomas of Becket took place. The monks had even told the Archbishop, "Lock the doors of the cathedral because your life is in danger." He said, "No, I cannot do that." And he was willing to obviously trust in God and give his life for the Lord. The soldiers came in and they killed him by the sword right at the altar of our Blessed Mother. Again, if you go there, you'll see a large red cross on the floor where the blood of Thomas of Becket was shed for the faith. Of course, this murder in the cathedral shocked all of England and all of Europe, and Thomas was immediately, within 3 years, canonized and declared a martyr for the faith. So he is certainly one of the great saints of England. So I'll give you a blessing now with the relic of Thomas of Becket. It's one of the most difficult relics to obtain because 400 years later, Henry VIII would dig up his remains and scatter them and desecrate them so people could not go in pilgrimage to Canterbury. But thanks be to God, some of the relics of Thomas of Becket still remain. And of course, it became a great place of pilgrimage. Chaucer would write Canterbury tales among the pilgrims walking to Canterbury to pray at the tomb of Thomas of Becket. And they would tell stories as they walked, and Chaucer would eventually write down these stories in Canterbury Tales. So I'll give you a blessing now with this great relic of this great saint, a martyr who gave his life for Christ. Intercession of St. Thomas of Becket. May Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.